Hey you guys, so for today's video, I wanted to go through the absolute basics of foundation. A ton of you guys have asked me about color matching, so we're gonna kind of go into that a little bit. And then I'm also gonna do once on my face with a really in-depth sheer coverage and spot concealing routine, kind of like what I'm doing day to day lately. And then on the other side, I'm gonna do a more full coverage, less dewy, sheer, glowy goddess makeup. This video is going to be a really long one. I hope that there's some tips in here that help you guys out. Without any further ado, let's just jump into it. Okay, so to kick this off, a lot of people ask how to properly color match. This is a little bit of a tricky one because it is very, very rare, in my opinion, that you will ever find a foundation shade that matches perfectly. We are humans, we have veins, we have sunspots, we have acne scars, discoloration, rosacea, all these different kinds of things going on with our skin. So that creates a lot of different layers of colors going on in the skin. For me, I always end up mixing foundations because I find that a lot of foundations just stray too far into one tone and I just don't ever perfectly match anything. I would definitely recommend going into an Ulta, Sephora, MAC, whatever's accessible to you that has testers of foundations, and try out one foundation that's super yellow and one foundation that's super pink. So I just have a few different kinds of foundation swatch here so I can show you guys sort of the difference. Here we have one that's quite a bit more yellow. You can see that it's pulling quite yellow on my skin tone. Then we have one that's very pink, peachy, and then one that's a little bit more neutral, kind of leaning a little bit more olive. If you start with just the two, the really yellow and the really pink, you can kind of see which way your skin shifts more. This can be a little bit tricky. Sometimes people have really yellow toned skin, but because they have any kind of like redness or acne scarring or whatever, they might think that they're leaning more towards pink. I personally find that more people land somewhere more neutral. So for me, I would typically end up kind of like mixing two shades like this. So rather than having something that pulls super pink or super yellow, I like to have two shades that kind of mix together from each side of the spectrum. If you find that you have a really hard time matching yourself, nothing seems to look right on your skin, it might be because you're more neutral. A lot of the times people are trying to categorize themselves really yellow or really pink, and that's just not human skin. If you find that yellow looks better on your skin, but it still looks a little bit off, you might want to kind of venture more into olive skin toned foundations. Olives will always be that kind of yellow with a little bit of that green tinge to it. I know there's kind of like this age-old method of finding out what your undertones are based on what kind of jewelry you wear. I personally just don't think that's super helpful. I think it's way easier to go in person, see the two tones on your skin and see which one looks more off to you, and whatever looks more off, cancel that foundation out. Then you can kind of go from there, because a lot of the times, I'm sure even when you looked at the foundations that I had swatched, you can tell what looks so completely 100% wrong. If you're still really struggling, ask an associate. They can usually help you kind of on the right track to finding a foundation that's gonna work better for you. Foundation is something that's super personal. Some people like to wear a foundation that's more yellow, more pink, more tanned, more light, whatever it is. If all you're looking for is the absolute best color match, then I almost always recommend mixing foundations. That way you can kind of pull in different undertones, and then you also have the option to play around with mixing those formulas as well. A lot of the times I find that some dewy foundations are too dewy, a lot of matte foundations are too matte, and when they're mixed together, they're perfect. So that's kind of my quick suggestions in terms of color matching. Unfortunately, depending on your skin tone, there may not be that many foundations on the market for you, so you might not have the luxury of choosing what foundation might be best for your skin type. Those of us that land in the white to white with a little bit of a tan tend to have a really large spectrum in terms of foundations we can select from, color matching wise, formula wise, finish wise, and I find that there's a lot missing on the really pale spectrum, olive spectrum, and then a really deep spectrum. But if you do have the option, if you have sensitive skin, definitely recommend avoiding any foundations that are high in alcohols, high in fragrance. This is just going to be an irritant to your skin. It's not going to end up feeling comfortable for you. Same thing with dry skin. A lot of the times anything that's really high in alcohol or fragrance can be quite irritating for dry skin as well, especially if you have very dry skin that sometimes cracks, peels, whatever. A lot of times people with oily skin gravitate towards foundations that do not have oils in them, that are super matte, super full coverage, whatever it may be. You absolutely do not have to do that. if you don't want to. If you do have oily skin, there are ways that you can wear more dewy foundations. It really all just comes down to what you want your skin to look like and what you feel most comfortable with. Throughout this entire series, but especially in this video, I definitely don't want you guys to take any of these as rules that you have to follow. These are simply suggestions that are hopefully gonna help you along the way to finding something that's gonna work for you to make you the most confident. So just keep that in mind. If you wanna wear a foundation that is super yellow, even though you have a pink undertone, do whatever you want, whatever you feel best in. That's really all that matters at the end of the day. Another thing I wanted to quickly touch on is oxidizing foundation. What's actually happening is the foundation is dry. Some foundations don't have much of a difference in color or tone when they are dried down, but some really do. So that's where you will hear a lot of people talking about oxidized foundations. This oxidized so bad, this oxidized orange on me. When you are going into wherever you're going into to try on foundations, definitely put some on your jawline, walk around, and really let it dry down 10 minutes or more. You can also take home a little tester so that you can see it in kind of like daylight, bathroom light, wherever you may be. That way you can kind of make sure that the foundation is actually going to match you once it's dry. If you find that the formulas that you typically gravitate towards end up turning really orange on you or just darker or whatever, sometimes it's worthwhile to go a shade lighter. So if that's a problem you've been having with your current foundation, it's worth going in and picking up maybe a few little samples of different shades around your typical shade, swatching them on your jawline at home, letting them really dry down, and then kind of going from there in terms of what might be better suited to you. So with all those kind of quick things out of the way, I'm gonna go ahead and do my foundation. I'm gonna do one side more full coverage, and I'm gonna do one side with more sheer coverage. I think this side is gonna be the side I'm gonna do with more sheer coverage just because I have more spots over here. So I wanna really show you guys more in depth how I choose to cover my acne, my scarring, all that kind of good stuff. Again, you don't have to go in one direction or the other. You can do something right down the middle. Take from this what you want to build your own foundation routine that's gonna work best for your skin. Okay, so I wanted to quickly talk about, sorry you guys, this is gonna be so like, it's so in-depth and boring. Okay, so I wanted to quickly touch on different types of brushes, sponges, all that kind of stuff, what might work best for you. So a lot of people here on YouTube really recommend really dense brushes. This is the Sigma F80 brush. Super popular. A lot of people love dual fiber brushes like this, things that are really short and dense, more for buffing. Anything that is dense, meaning that it just has a lot of bristles in there, is going to give you way more full coverage foundation. I would definitely recommend this kind of brush sooner for those of you that want that full coverage. Also for those of you that have oily skin. The one thing I don't like about these brushes for dry skin is that a lot of people tend to apply kind of in a buffing circular motion. If you have really dry skin or acne prone skin, a lot of the times that buffing motion can kind of lift and get underneath any like dry areas or areas of patchiness. When used correctly, this can also give you a really beautiful airbrushed kind of finish to your foundation. I also find that streaks are way less likely to happen with a brush like this. One thing that I will say if you are working with a brush like this is to really work the product into the brush. And by that I mean, let's say I had the foundation on the back of my hand, I'd really press that product into the brush first before I go onto my skin. A lot of the times you can get really streaky, kind of like uneven application if you just kind of like dip your brush in and have all that product sitting on the very top. With dual fiber brushes like this, it's basically two different lengths of bristles. So you have your black bristles, which are shorter, and your white bristles, which are longer and a little bit softer. These black bristles are really the ones doing the work buffing that product in. So by working that product deeper down into the brush, it's going to give you a more flawless application rather than just having it sitting right on top, which is going to look a lot more streaky and a lot more patchy on your skin. Then we have the foundations that look kind of like a paintbrush. I don't actually have one of them anymore because I got rid of all of them because I hate them. But this is like the most similar kind of thing I could find just for reference. So with these guys, it's kind of tricky because you can achieve really beautiful foundation with these kinds of brushes. Brushes like this can offer a really beautiful kind of like more sheer model kind of skin. The only thing that makes these kinds of brushes a little bit trickier is that they are a lot less dense. They have a lot more give to them. And because they don't have as many bristles in them, a lot of the times that results in streakiness. These, however, are more so what I recommend towards those of you with dry skin if you do prefer using a brush over a sponge. The one biggest thing with this is that you never want to apply going upwards because that's just going to stick to all of the hairs and dryness on your face. Always apply in nice downward strokes all over the face. If you find that you're getting streakiness with this, I like to just kind of tap over top and really press that foundation in. So I'll usually quickly kind of swipe it on like this and then just press over top. Then we have our lovely beauty blender. Beauty blenders, in my opinion, are just so beginner friendly. They really make makeup super easy. You can also do super full coverage with this. The thing that's kind of nice about it is that you kind of have that option to sort of just press the foundation into the skin and apply a ton of coverage in the areas that you want it. Whereas a lot of the times with a brush, you just do end up kind of moving it around quite a bit more. So if you really want like full coverage, a lot of the times I would sooner suggest a beauty blender. I also find that beauty blenders are easier if you are working over top of other product. So for instance, like let's say you wanted to put down like a cream blush or whatever underneath your foundation, a lot of the times beauty blenders are better for that because they're not going to move product around. That said, a few downsides of the beauty blenders is that they are quite expensive considering that you cannot use them forever. So I mean, there's an option of buying a brush for $20 to $30 that you're gonna have hopefully for a lifetime if you're buying high quality brushes, or a beauty blender that you'll have for maybe a couple months. I also find it really tricky to properly sanitize them. Even if you are cleaning them regularly, there is still going to be that product that gets stuck in the very inside of your sponge, and that breeds bacteria, unfortunately. Okay, holy crap, let's move into this. Okay, first things first, you wanna always properly prep your skin. So I'm going to be starting with the Facial Radiance pads from First Aid Beauty. Obviously, usually you would do your kind of skincare, whatever, in the morning. Hopefully you're doing your skincare in the morning. Properly prepping the skin is going to give you a way better finish and look to your foundation. I know a lot of people are weird about moisturizing before their foundation. They feel like it's going to slip around, especially those of you with oily skin. Moisturizer is just super important. It acts as a barrier. It helps obviously moisturize the skin, and it's going to give you a more flawless finish to your foundation. There will be moisturizers out there that are more suited to those of you with oily skin if you kind of struggle with getting on the moisturizer train. A lot of the times I find people with oily skin tend to prefer moisturizers that are a little bit more gel based rather than kind of more of a lotion. So anyways, just have a quick toner all over my skin, and then I'm going to take my moisturizer. I take a pretty generous amount of this just because I do have dry skin. You'll hear it about 45,000 times throughout this video. Then you can apply your sunscreen. I'm not going to apply my sunscreen because it's expensive, and I'm gonna take my makeup off right after this. So I'm gonna use the Smashbox Primerizer. I find that primers are completely like a personal preference thing. There are people that absolutely swear by them and feel like they make their makeup completely different and make it last longer and all that kind of stuff. If you feel that way, do it, man. For me, I usually just end up grabbing primers that are more hydrating. I'm gonna be using MAC Face and Body for this. I usually mix N2, which is a little bit more pink toned, and C3, which is a little bit more kind of yellow toned. If you are looking for a good sheer foundation and you find that you're not really able to find what you're looking for, you can always take a foundation that's not sheer that you love and sheer it out yourself, either with a moisturizer, a primer, or any kind of like serum. I usually use my Vichy 89 mineral serum for this. So I usually just take a pump of that, mix it in with whatever foundation I'm using to sheer it out myself rather than having to go buy a sheer foundation. But I do like buying sheer foundation too, and then shearing it out further. So I'm gonna start first with concealing. When I'm working with more sheer coverage, I personally prefer to apply my concealer first. I find that this just creates less of that kind of weird halo effect. You know when you put your foundation on and then you have your concealer on and it's like white, like this little like glowing halo under your eye? I find that applying concealer first helps correct that, but I also find that when we're going in and spot correcting, if you don't perfectly blend out your spot concealing, it's fine once you put your foundation over top. Whereas if you put your foundation down first and then go in and spot conceal, a lot of the times what will end up happening is it'll look okay, and then you'll get outside into the daylight and there's like these perfect little spots around all of your acne. So I'm taking my Josie Maran Vibrancy Concealer. I'm just going to pop on probably a couple different colors, but I'm not sure. Yeah, I think I'm gonna take a little bit of medium and then a little bit of light. And then I'm going to take my beauty blender for this. When it comes to concealer, I find that a lot of times people really over apply concealer. I feel like a lot of people feel like they have way worse bags than they do, or they need way more coverage than they do. I also think that it's a pretty common technique here on YouTube. A lot of the beauty YouTubers tend to apply quite a bit of concealer and it looks absolutely stunning underneath lights when they're filming and stuff like that. And it's just sometimes personal preference. Sometimes people prefer that full coverage. Personally, day to day, I would recommend trying to use less concealer rather than more, just because I find that it ends up looking a lot more skin-like. It doesn't look as cakey and textured underneath your eyes. And I also find that the less concealer you use, the less likely it is to kind of settle into any fine lines and stuff like that. Then what I'm gonna do is take the medium shade. So this is the darker of the two that I used underneath the eyes. And I'm going to use this to conceal my little acne spots. So with this, I would apply way less than you think you need. You can kind of see here, like I have the tiniest little bit of product on, and even this is probably too much. So I can take my ring finger and just really lightly tap over that, and even still there's too much product on there. So I can take this and kind of press it over top of any spots that need it. So with this, I really like to press that product into the skin quite a bit. When it comes to concealing acne spots, I would recommend using not necessarily a darker concealer. You definitely want something that matches as close as it possibly can. But if you have a concealer that's a little bit darker and a little bit lighter, I would go for the darker one. I find that lighter concealers tend to really highlight things. Sometimes I see people gravitating towards lighter concealers because they think it's going to lighten the appearance of like the redness or the darkness that's caused from the acne or the acne scarring. It actually just really highlights them and makes it more apparent. So with this, I kind of go ahead and blend it out with my little finger. I just kind of dot over top and I really press that concealer into the skin. I find that this is just always easier than using a brush to blend out, because a lot of the times with a brush, it just ends up blending away a lot of that coverage that you want focused on that main area, and it also can kind of make texture more apparent, whereas with the finger it just kind of helps warm up that product, really push it and blend it into the skin. I'm gonna zoom you guys in a little bit so you can see how much this acne is actually covered right now close up. So here you can kind of see there's definitely still some redness kind of peeking through, but for me, I think this looks better rather than going over really full force with a super full coverage concealer, because I find that that ends up emphasizing texture. So if there's a little bit of color peeking through, I'm not too upset about it. It's the texture that I find makes any kind of like acne or scarring look way, way, way more noticeable. So this is where we're gonna leave this right now. You can kind of see what I was talking about with like the little rings around it. Obviously I don't have foundation on, but a lot of the times that's how you can actually end up seeing the concealer if you do it over top of the foundation rather than underneath. Okay, so now that we have our concealer down, I'm going to take my little sponge. Same thing with this that I was talking about with the brush. I really tend to press the product into my sponge so it's not this huge kind of glop sitting on top, especially if we're going for more sheer coverage. What we're gonna do here is keep most of the coverage kind of focused on the center of the face. So I'm gonna start right underneath where I applied my concealer. You always want to bounce your beauty blender or your sponge rather than kind of swiping it on, because that's going to move that coverage around, and especially if you're going for sheer coverage, you want the product where you're putting it. So again, just pressing it into that skin. When you're coming around these little kind of tiny areas, I like to kind of squish my beauty blender just so I can kind of get in there a little bit easier and make sure that everything's nice and covered. And that is where I would personally leave my skin on the sheer coverage / like dewy side of things. So here you can see a little bit closer. That's kind of the amount that I like to cover my skin personally. I don't like to go too much more than this, and I like to just kind of leave it from here. I find that this just looks a lot more kind of fresh and glowy and skin-like rather than having a ton of concealer over top of those areas. Then in terms of powdering, no matter what your skin type is, I usually recommend trying to strategically powder rather than powdering everywhere. Again, obviously personal preference, that's just how I prefer to apply my makeup. What I mean by strategic powdering is only powdering in the areas that you know you need it. So for instance, if you have an oily T-zone, only powdering down the T-zone. Wherever it is that you feel like you need powdering, I think it's great to go ahead and apply it for that extra setting ability, and also to mattify it if you know you get oily in those areas or whatever. But I do like to leave certain areas of the face unpowdered just to keep that skin-like appearance if that's something that you're going for. If you want to be fully matte, go for it, man. But if you find that when you powder, you end up not liking the appearance of your skin as much, try the strategic powdering and see how you like it. So I'm gonna take my Hourglass Veil Powder. This is just the loose one. I like to grab it on a brush, and I will tap off almost all of that excess, and I will just set underneath my eyes. And I like to just kind of give it a little tap test. I'll see to make sure that it doesn't feel tacky anymore. And as soon as it doesn't feel tacky, I'm done. I don't apply any more powder than that. So I like to use that loose kind of setting powder for the areas that I know I really, really need set, so that I'm not gonna have creasing underneath my eyes. But then in areas that I might wanna mattify a little bit or add a little bit of extra kind of staying power, I will go for a pressed powder. So I've been using the Hourglass Ambient Lighting Powders lightly. I will just take a little bit of that and just press it onto the areas where I need it. So a lot of the times I will kind of press over top of the areas where I'm having breakouts, and that's where I'm gonna leave that skin. All right, let's hop over to the full coverage side. So for this side, I'm going to start with my LC Complete Ready Silk Concealer. I'm gonna take that again underneath my eyes. So something I wanted to kind of quickly touch on is when to use color correctors versus when to use just concealer. Color correctors were a really big thing that exploded in 2017. Sephora was pushing it really, really hard. Every brand was coming out with a ton of color correctors, and everyone was kind of left being like, Should I use one? Do I need one? What's going on? I know for me, I very, very, very rarely feel the need to pull out a color corrector. Concealer usually does the trick just fine, especially because we have so many full coverage concealers on the market. The times in which I would use a color corrector is when there's very, very obvious discoloration to the skin. So we're talking like more severe rosacea, really, really, really deep kind of blue or purple circles underneath the eyes. Just picking up a little bit more of that concealer, and I'm gonna put it around any areas where I see that redness. I know some people have asked me about using, you know, green color correctors for their acne. Personally, I find that the less layers, the better for acne. Taking that same concealer on a little brush, and I'm gonna go in and kind of spot correct any areas that need it. But when it comes to color correcting, I do recommend sticking to that same mantra of less is more. I know there was a ton of color correcting Instagram videos where people would apply like a red lipstick underneath their eyes or like green all over their face or whatever. It just really ends up looking like more and more and more layers on your skin, because it is more and more layers on your skin. So even if you get rid of whatever color you're trying to get rid of completely, your skin looks like a mask. A little bit of discoloration in the skin is natural. I think sometimes people are kind of comparing their skin to people on Instagram or YouTube that have this perfect, flawless base that has no discoloration whatsoever. But for me personally, I find that always looks so just like stark in person. And also the other thing is you're not going to put foundation over your entire body. So, you know, we have kind of like freckles and sunspot and redness and stuff like that on our necks, on our hands, whatever. And so when you have this like perfect, flawless face, I find it looks so odd with the rest of your skin that just looks natural and perfectly fine. Okay, so I have my concealer down. I used one that had a little bit more full coverage to it. I am going to mix my La Mer foundation and my Smashbox Studio Skin 15 Hour Wear. These are both a little bit more kind of like full coverage. This might not be a perfect match. I just don't have a ton of full coverage foundations anymore. So we're working with what we got. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and apply this with a brush just for shits and gigs. I might go over and kind of stipple over top with my beauty blender. We'll just see what happens. So I'm taking my Sigma F80 brush. I'm really working that foundation into the brush. I'm gonna press it onto the back of my hand just to get off any excess product and press that even further in. And then I'm gonna go ahead and start stippling over top. If you have oily skin, you can totally go in with that buffing motion, which will give you a really nice kind of like streak-free appearance. But because I had that dry skin, I'm just gonna go in downwards swiping motions. And any areas where I want more coverage, I'm really pressing that brush onto my skin. So another question that I get quite often is how you stop problem areas from moving around. So I know a big one for a lot of people is right around where they would wear glasses or sunglasses or whatever. I'm gonna take a slightly smaller brush just to kind of go into like this area here. At the end of the day, I really like to encourage people to recognize that makeup is makeup. It's going to move around on your skin. It's not your natural skin. So it's really hard to get makeup to defy life. But in terms of any areas that you feel like come off too quickly, my favorite way is to set them by taking a little powder puff. I don't have one because I never, ever set my skin like this anymore. But basically you would take a little powder puff and you would kind of roll it around your finger like this, dip it into a loose powder and press and roll the powder onto different areas. So whether that's underneath your eye, in that little area where your glasses normally touch, even along the jawline and stuff like that, if you find that wiping off quite often. It's a really good way to set without having to use way too much powder and get that kind of cakey appearance, but it really kind of locks in that foundation and concealer. Okay, so same thing with this side. I'm gonna go ahead and powder. Just taking my little hourglass powder again, tapping off all that excess and patting it on underneath my eye. And then again, you could go in and powder any other areas. I'm probably not going to here because this is pretty like matte and full coverage as is. So there we can kind of see the difference between a more full coverage foundation and a more kind of sheer to like medium coverage foundation. On this side, you can see it's like a very like clean, ready to go base. There's no color showing through whatsoever. So if that's something that makes you more comfortable in your skin, you might kind of gravitate more towards full coverage. And then on this side, we have the more kind of like sheer coverage foundation, a lot more natural skin-like kind of looking, but it is something that's a little bit different, and a lot of people are uncomfortable with this at first because you can see a lot more kind of like redness, discoloration, color peeking through there in every area. One other thing that I wanted to quickly talk about is the foundation mask. A lot of the times we'll have that kind of perfect line where you can see your foundation and then like your white ear or your really light neck or whatever, just like that obvious separation. Two good ways to avoid that is either to apply the coverage more to the center of your face. So on this full coverage side, what we could have done was taken the sheer foundation, applied that kind of to the perimeter of the face, and then applied the fuller coverage kind of more in the center. That way the sheer coverage is gonna look a lot less noticeable rather than like a full coverage, like perfect color here and then like your very obvious neck. The other thing that you can do obviously is blend foundation down your neck. Personally, I don't love that as much just because I wear a lot of like hoodies, things that are kind of like up high around my neck, and I don't like my makeup rubbing off on it. But all in all, the biggest thing is just to really pay attention when you're doing makeup. Can't relate, never gonna start doing that. Yeah. Wow, I haven't done full coverage in a minute, man. I'm so conflicted right now. I don't know how to... See, like when I look at this just by itself, I'm like, yeah, that looks good. But then when I look in the mirror in front of me, I'm like, fuck, man. This looks like a really nice little primed canvas. Anyways, all right, you guys, so that is everything for me today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something cool today. I will see you guys next time. Peace out.